Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Marche, the webinar director at Advice Chaser. Before we introduce our guests and get started, I need to do a bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors, and any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own and, however true, funny, or interesting, are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. We're thrilled to bring you this educational presentation. Attendees are muted, but we encourage you to ask questions using the chat box. The presenter will answer those queries during or after the webinar today as appropriate. If you ask a question in the chat box, go ahead and leave your phone number as well. If we can't get to your question during the event, we'll make sure someone reaches out to you after today's event. We want this experience to be as educational as possible, so please don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. I'd like to introduce you to today's moderator. Joseph P. Okros specializes in retirement long-term planning for current retirees, those retiring within 10 years, engineers, professionals, college employees, and small business owners. Joe also does financial planning work for individuals who are going through a divorce or who have recently been divorced or widowed. Joe is an investment and advisor representative. He maintains licensing in life insurance, annuities, long-term care insurance, and disability insurance, as well as in investments. He is also a National Social Security Advisor Certificate holder. Joe has been a licensed attorney in Michigan since 1994. He was the managing partner of a law firm in Southeastern Michigan prior to working as a financial advisor. And Joe resides in Ann Arbor with his 3 children. Joe, I'm going to go ahead and turn that over to you. Okay. And we'd love to hear a little more about what we're going to talk about today.
Okay, thank you, Marche. Yep. So like Marche said, my name is Joe Okros, and
oh, I'm sorry I pronounced that wrong.
Okros. That's okay. I would say pretend the second O is an I. That's a tough name. But yes, so first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for joining. I know divorce is a very difficult time period. I had my own personal experience with it, and it's a challenge. But I just want to let everybody know that you'll make it. Stay positive, and I hope today's presentation gives you a little guidance and direction as far as the divorce process, and then how to proceed from there and have the best potential outcome possibly for you, your children, and going forward at that point. So I'll turn it back to Marche to guide us through the slides then. So you can see the first slide here is understanding the stages of the divorce process. So we'll go on to there we go. Okay. So how long will it take for my divorce to be completed? Now, one thing I want to say about divorces in general is every divorce is its own factual scenario. There's no every divorce is its own snowflake, let's say. So you're going to get it you'll find when you're going through a divorce, there's a whole lot of armchair quarterbacks in divorce, meaning that you're going to get a lot of people feeding you, well, this is how my divorce went, this is what you should do, this is how you should handle it, him or her, this is what, and take everything with a grain of salt. I always tell people, try to stick around with positive-minded people, understand that your divorce is its own situation, and you're not similar in any specific way to any other divorce. So like I said, take it with a grain of salt. Be grateful that people are caring for you and looking out for you, but also don't let people worry you or say, well, mine happened like this, so you better hurry up and do this. Hopefully you retain a good divorce attorney and they can guide and direct you and look for positive reinforcement along the way. And we'll talk about some of those slides as we go through. But the basis with a divorce is there's 2 types of divorce with children, divorce without children. Now I'm speaking from Michigan. Every state is different throughout the country, but most of them follow a similar pattern. Divorces with children in Michigan have a minimum time period of 6 months before the court system will let you complete your divorce. Now, as without children, it's a 90-day period before they'll let you complete your divorce with children. The 6-month period for with children is basically because you're going to have to go through the whole friend of the court process, and that's a more drawn out process. They want to make sure everything is done correct with custody and parenting time and those type of issues. So that's in general. But don't think that, okay, I don't have children, so I'll be done in 90 days. It's very rare it's 90 days, especially at a lengthy divorce. If you have assets, all that stuff will play into it. For instance, I'm working with a client now going through a divorce, and they have a business together, and there's a lot of assets, been married a good amount of time. Children are above 21, so technically it could end in 90 days. But I'm coaching her through the process until we can get to the point of helping her out with her retirement planning. But she's going to be a year plus, and I know it's bugging her, and she just wants it to move along. But it's a process. So and you'll have laws in the action during a divorce, and you wonder, where's my divorce attorney? I haven't heard anything for a month. It's just there's different stages and processes, and we'll cover those as we go. But those are kind of so it can be as quick as 90 days. We've had them up to a year and a half, 2 years. If you have 10 different rental properties, you own a couple businesses, you have a good amount of assets and investments, or you got a child case that you're really battling on custody, they can drag out. But for the most part, I would say 90 days to 12 months, and all the factors play into that. Okay. So the stages of the divorce process. So when a divorce is filed, that is, the plaintiff is the person doing the filing. That plaintiff will then have typically a process server. Sometimes there can be a very amicable divorce, and you might be using one attorney, or you might both have talked about that you're getting a divorce, so you just bring it home with you, and your spouse will sign for it. But the person that's receiving is then the defendant in the case. So what we call this early stage as divorce attorneys is the pleading stages. And it's very, very generic, very base. It doesn't really dig into it very strongly. It's really a complaint to get the ball rolling. A defendant then will file an answer, potential a counter complaint. That's usually counter complaints if it's a highly contested divorce and you want to make your point also. But the first stage, the early stage, is really pleading stage. The bulk of the case really starts kicking off, say a couple months into the case is when we start digging into the discovery stages. And that's the stage where you really start inquiring from each attorney will be inquiring from the other side with a couple documents. They'll file interrogatories, which are typically, they're big, they're 50, 70, 80 pages. If you've gone through that, you know what I'm talking about. It lasts as your life history. There may also be some very specific ones about stages of what's going on now, assets, personal situations. They'll inquire, trying to figure out if somebody is seeing somebody during the divorce process. But this is really the bulk of the case, is that's the interrogatories. And along with that will typically be a request for production of documents. And with that, they got to go hand in hand with the interrogatories, and that will be asking stuff like, please provide all W-2 statements from your employer for the last 2 years. Please provide tax returns. Please provide, if it's a business, please provide one person in the marriage, it's their business. Please provide profit loss statement, everything related to the business really for the last 5 years. So that's the stage where the parties are really kind of learning about the case, and the attorneys are trying to figure out where to go from there. They may also avoid not all cases, but occasionally you might have depositions in cases. Those are usually when they're hotly contested divorces. You'll see depositions a lot if there's business asset type of matters in a divorce, as well as infidelity and affairs. You may very well get called into divorce. That person that somebody is seeing may get called into the divorce situation. So this is I'd say this is like the early stages, the judgment of divorce. I say the bread, and the discovery process is the substance in between your sandwich. And that's the discovery process. And then once we get through there, what happens is you're working towards a judgment of divorce. That concludes a case. Now, judgment of divorce can be a settlement where people amicably or the attorneys negotiate a settlement, and it's fine, and we're done, and we sign the judgment, enter it with the court. put it on the record with the judge, and then you're officially divorced. If we can't quite get there with both parties working together, the judge typically will assign, or the two attorneys will jointly pick out a mediator to mediate divorce. Typically, a mediator is an attorney. Most of the time, they still might be practicing family law, divorce law, or they may have gone 100% into mediation. They're typically knowledgeable. Mediators are typically they've been schooled in divorce. They handle a lot themselves. They get to a point where they maybe are tired of practicing divorce and they want to work in the mediation realm. They'll try to mediate the divorce. They don't have authority to say this is how it's going to happen, but they try to reach amicable settlement between the parties. If all else fails, I'd say 1-2% of divorces end up going to trial, and that's when nothing's working. Judges hate to do divorce trials because they're hard. They're hard on everybody, but sometimes it has to happen. Usually it's where child issue is still, we can't be settled on a child issue, or it's really an asset type of divorce case and we can't reach any conclusion there. Okay.
Joe, I had a question here from the audience.
Okay.
In an amicable divorce, is there as much discovery as in as much discovery? You said there were 5 years or more.
No,
Is that typical?
yeah, that's a real general statement as far as a time period and how long. Typically, if it's amicable, there's two types of amicable. There could be an amicable, and when we practice law, I'd say when we had our law practice, or when I was practicing law before I joined the retirement planning business with my dad's practice, we probably did over 250 divorces. We probably had maybe 25 where we were the only attorney. So that's very amicable. That means both parties come to you. Now, technically, I'm only representing one party. That case, the two parties are on board with everything. There's really no discovery. It's a joint discovery. They come in, they tell us exactly what they have. They've almost agreed upon what the division is going to be. And so there's not even interrogatories. There's no request for production of documents. It's just pretty clean. There can be an amicable where the two parties get representation, but the two attorneys are working very kindly together. The parties are working kindly together. In those situations, there may still not be actually formal requests for production of documents and interrogatories. Sometimes, honestly, an attorney may send them out in that situation just to protect themselves legally, making sure nothing slipped through. Maybe it seemed amicable, both seems things nice. 3 years later, it popped up. They say the husband or wife had an offshore account with $2 million in it that they were hiding assets. So an attorney sometimes may protect themselves, but it's usually much cleaner in an amicable divorce. If you get ones where you're kind of battling, you get detailed questions in there, and as an attorney, when we write them, we're looking for our clients' best interest. So we usually had, honestly, what we had is when we had our divorce, say interrogatories and requests for productive documents, we would have our shell built into say a saved document. And then based on that current situation, we would add in specifics, or if it was a battle, that's when you really dug in, you get tight. So if it's amicable, I guess the long story, getting to the point, amicable shouldn't be much interrogatories, pretty straightforward. If it's a battle, that's when you start really digging into how long you're asking for documents and a lot of unusual stuff.
All right. So what you were saying earlier, every divorce is like a snowflake.
It is. It's true. And as a divorce attorney, it's one of the least cited areas of law. And by cited, I mean where you're citing case law, unless you're getting deep into battles. And if you're getting battles and you're going to trial, then you're citing case law. But it really is factually based, and every situation is 100% factually different.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. How is marital money handled during the divorce process? This comes up quite a bit, and I'm working on a situation right now where there's concerns of violations of how things are being handled monetarily wise during the divorce proceedings by my client's ex during the proceedings. My client's ex handles the financial situation. And basically what happens is when I go in, say I'm a plaintiff or plaintiff attorney, I go in to file my go and file my complaint for divorce. I go in there and attempt to get 2 orders called ex parte orders. Ex parte orders are orders that a judge will sign without the other side knowing about it or being present. So it's very rare that it happens. It's usually extreme cases or at the beginning of the divorce, I go file my complaint. I get 2 ex parte orders. One is status quo. That is that bills will continue to be paid as they were being paid throughout the divorce process. That should be straightforward. If somebody in this situation, this person is failing to pay my client's car payments and different stuff like that, even though in that situation he's the breadwinner and he has always paid the bills. So what happens at that point is if it keeps up, her divorce attorney will have to file a motion for violation of a court order. You don't want to violate a court order and anger a judge because they're upset with you the rest of the case. The other ex parte order is dissipation of assets. Neither party shall dispose of, hide assets. So basically, wherever the assets are at the time the divorce is filed, they should remain intact and no movement, no transferring. Nobody should be hiding. Nobody should be transferring their 401k to something else. It's supposed to be, the court wants no violations of these orders. So that's how the financial process is handled during the divorce process until the judgment of divorce. And that's when division of assets typically will take place and people will go in their own direction.
Well, like you said before about the divorce lasting anywhere from 90 days to 2 years, I can understand why this has to be in place.
Yeah, you could do because there's you hope that both parties are on board. You hope that both attorneys are on board. I mean, we dealt with some attorneys along the way, just being honest with you. They were just troublemakers and stirring it up. And some divorce attorneys want their reputation to be the divorce attorney that's going to stir it up. And so those kind of people are looking for that type of person. So it's you're supposed to follow court orders, but sometimes people don't. Right. So the next slide here is the best strategies for splitting marital assets. So what are the assets that will be divided? So when you're looking at a divorce situation, you're really looking at all assets in a divorce. Now, one thing to remember is, say you started working for an employer when you were 22, you got married at 35, and you got divorced at 60. Technically, your premarital assets remain yours unless you commingle them with other joint family funds after you're married. So in that situation, as an attorney, we would argue, well, that first 15, say first 10, 15 years that I was employed at University of Michigan, that money's off the table. That was my money at that time period. My spouse is not entitled to that. But then everything from date going forward, date of marriage, going forward to date of divorce, all that money is divisible. And we'll talk in how the division works in a slide or two. But basically, we're looking at real property, which can be mainly your marital home. You can have rental properties. You can have business property, personal property. Most people will take their own personal property as far as clothing, that type of thing will go in their own direction. Jewelry typically will go in their own direction. Cars are something that will be negotiated in that situation. And then as well, you got your retirement plans. Those are all on the table, your 401ks, your 403bs, your various retirement plans. All other investments will be on the table. Your businesses will be on the table for a division. So say one person was a professional, had a medical practice, one person was a stay-at-home mom. Medical practice started right at the beginning of the marriage. It's worth 2.5 million now. Technically, one way or another, the wife in that situation is entitled to 50% of the marital practice. So that's where you see some situations where businesses end up being sold. You know, it can go in a lot of directions, but those are the base different types of property and assets that are divided during a divorce case.
We had a question that I think you already touched on this a little bit, but maybe if you can reiterate that. Is separation of assets based on date of separation, date of filing, or the final date of divorce?
So what they're going to do is separation of assets. The date that the assets start growing or being one is the date of marriage. So the date that we get married, anything we acquired together or our own 401ks, those become marital assets, and those are all divisible in the negotiating process. and then you go through the whole divorce process, then you negotiate some type of settlement based on the division of those assets. And that is put in a written copy, which is the judgment of divorce. That's a big document, and that will list every single thing that is going to be divided in the asset, the children, the kids, everything, right? And that judgment, and then that is filed with the court. One thing I also wanted to quickly touch on, because this comes up, is inheritance. Inheritance is technically, even if it's during the divorce process or the marriage, is technically just that person's money. However, say you inherit, your mom and dad pass away, you inherit $500,000, you go and put it in a joint bank account at that point. You have now technically commingled the assets. The other party now can potentially jump in there and say, hey, they put it in our joint bank account, they paid some bills with it, now it's commingled. It's going to be an argument, but these are some of these things I'm trying to just touch on because it can go forever talking about some of these areas. But if you I don't preach divorce, but if you're in a difficult marriage or one that's struggling and you get an inheritance, you might want to keep it in a separate account and not commingle it.
All right. And so when does that separation of assets occur? Does that occur when the divorce decree is I guess rubber stamped by the judge? I don't know exactly what to call it.
Okay. Yeah. So if sometimes in amicable situations, you might have something where we say, okay, neither of us want to keep the house or neither of us can afford to keep the house on our own. We're going to put it up for sale. Housing is moving now, especially in like Ann Arbor and our 734 area code, or even southeastern Michigan. Stuff's happened because there's a shortage in supply. So your divorce maybe still going on, your house may sell. So sometimes you might see some agreed upon division of assets during the divorce proceeding. It's not as often, but there might be some division there. And usually there may be some kind of temporary order. You always want orders to protect that division. So somebody can't come back later on and say, wait, we didn't agree to that. So sometimes I'd say a very small percentage of assets, usually it's the housing situation, or if the parties need money to an investment. So they say, okay, let's split it 50-50 now. And then we'll actually put it into the actual judgment of divorce officially at the end, normally at the end of the case. So you're working towards it. When the judgment of divorce is entered, technically at that point, assets are to be divided at that point, because you may still have a house that's up for sale and the judgment of divorce was 12 months ago. So you still have to adhere to the terms of the judgment, as well as like investments. They may have to, retirement plans have to go through what they call a quadro. That's a qualified domestic relations order. So that would actually be filed at the time the judgment is filed. And then that order is signed by the judge, and that order is then sent to, say a person is working at General Motors and they have GM uses Fidelity for their 401ks. So the quadro goes to General Motors. So that might be taking place, 1, 2, 3 months after the divorce before that money is actually moved. So the answer to it is some things could be divided during the divorce proceedings, and an order will be drafted up and signed by a judge to protect that. All orders are eventually signed by a judge. Typically, then the judgment of divorce is kicking off the division, and the parties are supposed to divide at that point. If people violate a judgment of divorce, and that happens a decent amount, they don't follow through with it, they pull the house off the market and they were supposed to be the ones selling it, then you have to re-retain an attorney at that point, which is difficult. You got to re-retain an attorney to go back and file a violation of the judgment of divorce motion with the court and try to ask for attorney fees for the other person not complying with it. And it happens. I mean, honestly, 20-30% of the time you're having to go back to court because somebody's not complying. Their attorney got them to sign it and they're like, nope, not going to do it. So you got to keep bringing them back in until they have to do it.
I hate to interrupt with another question, but this one just goes right with this slide. And so I wanted to make sure, how is a 401k divided since it can't be withdrawn without paying a penalty?
Yep. So what happens is the quadro. So say we're at General Motors, 60 and 55. The 60-year-old, say it's a 60-year-old woman. She's working at General Motors. She's got 500,000 in her 401k. We've kind of reached an agreement where we're going to do a 50-50 split, 250 each. So she's still working there. doesn't want to withdraw, doesn't want a penalty, doesn't want to start paying taxes on it, the quadro actually divides the qualified domestic relations order, remember that goes with the judgment. Quadro divides the 401k and almost spawns the other party off their own little mini 401k. Now they are able to move it to a private independent advisor at that point, because, and technically most corporations 59 and a half or older, you can move, you can still be working at General Motors and move your money from your 401k to a private. A lot of people do that, move it to a private independent advisor at that point. But the whole point of it is you've just spawned off your own retirement plan. So you haven't actually removed money from it. So there's no penalties, there's no taxes, nothing has happened. Now it's just party A has 250 and party B has 250. Party B typically then jumps in immediately because they don't want it at their ex's 401k group and moves it to an independent advisor.
Okay, so there's no penalty as long as they don't withdraw anything.
Yeah, no penalties, no taxes, there's no ramifications. It's not like you went in and did that. The court is ordering that this thing be split. So Fidelity at that point has to go in there and divide it up and just pills off 250 or whatever portion you're pilling up, pills it off and starts. So you just like you got two mini 401ks then.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And it goes right into what you were saying, what you were going to say next.
Right, okay. So how are assets divided? So Michigan and most states are no-fault states. So this is just in general. What a no-fault state means is that anyone can file a divorce at any point. Back in the old days, you had to show reason why you wanted a divorce or the court wouldn't grant it. So whatever it would be, you couldn't just go in there and say, there's a, we've hit a point where we just don't get along. You had to have actually reason. Well, for quite a few years, Michigan's been a no-fault state. Most states are no fault. So with that being said, at any point, anybody can file for divorce. And the court is typically going to grant that they can proceed with their divorce. Now, there's a general rule out there, at least in Michigan, that everything is 50-50. But it doesn't necessarily work out to be perfectly 50-50. And as we go along, we'll talk about how to decide which assets you might want out of your 50% share. But, just telling it honestly, candidly, as a divorce attorney, then we represented some aggressive divorces and intense battles. There's negotiating tactics that go into it. So it's 50-50 on the face. Say we're representing somebody whose ex, the other party, is having an affair and it stirred up the divorce. We would use negotiating tactics because what happens in that situation, typically the person that may be seeing somebody in a case wants that divorce over as quick as possible. A lot of it is there's guilt going on. They want the divorce over. They just want to divide it up. They want it to be nice, clean, move on. We would coach our person at the time, you're going to hang in there because, this isn't something that you necessarily wanted. So we'll use tactics and I'm not just saying we did this, all good attorneys use this. Let's set up a deposition of the ex. Let's set up addition of the ex's new significant other. That kind of stuff gives you some leverage in a case, and all of a sudden you might have a 60-40 divorce. You want it over with, then you got to give me a little bit more, And so different tactics, and it could be an affair, it could be a variety of different things, hiding money, it could be just abuse, it could be a variety of different things. What leads you to negotiate tactics? So that's why there's a need for a divorce attorney, because otherwise you'd say, if it's all 50-50, why do we need divorce attorneys? Let's go and divide everything 50-50, because it's not always that clean, and there's negotiations to try to get upper hand in situations. And the last bullet point there is agreed upon mediation. So we kind of talked about that throughout the process. There's the agreed upon where we amicably agree upon how we're going to divide, or there's mediated or trial or battling about how we're going to divide assets. But, yeah. Okay. What assets are best for my personal situation? So when we look at situations, we have to take into account, and when you're going through a divorce, you have to take into account, okay, what is my situation? Am I the breadwinner? Am I, say, I decided to be an at-home mom or dad, and the other party is the breadwinner. So maybe in that situation, you might be granted spousal support, which is, that's what we call it in Michigan, which is alimony, spousal support. You may have some child support coming in if you have minor children, once they reach 18 and a half, or what I think off the top of my head what the rule is, but they've I think 18 and a half and graduated from high school is the rule that they're no longer in play for child support. But you may get asked, you may have some money coming in from child support or spousal support, but we got to look at when you go through the divorce, we have to look at all your situations, the monetary situation, the housing situation, short-term, long-term needs, your age, your liquidity needs, your own employment situation, to then decide what assets are best for me. If, say, in a situation where my ex has a nice business and it's making a lot of money, and I don't want to disrupt them making money in the business because that's leading to them paying child support and spousal support, I may say, okay, keep your business, but I want 90% of the 401k. So that's what I mean by every situation is different based on the personal situation in the case. Do you have need for liquid assets? Do we want more investments? Do you have a good income yourself so you don't mind getting retirement plans or real property? So we have to take into account all those bullet points right there when I say we as a divorce attorney, or when I'm handling cases as a financial advisor and I'm working with my party. Because a lot of times I'll work with somebody during their divorce proceedings. I got several going on right now where I'm kind of working with them, coaching them, allowing them to just give me calls, because a lot of times they're like, Joe, can I ask you a couple questions? I don't want to call my attorney at $350 an hour. And I'm like, sure, I don't have a problem with that. Because I'm coaching them, and then I'm also working with them and their attorney a lot of times to say, okay, this is what's my best interest in my client might be. We want more of that 401k because he or she's got the business. They want to retain the business, but we want our equal share of assets. So that's kind of how it all plays out. Like, it goes back to the snowflake thing. They're all different, but we really got to dig in and see what's your best interest in this scenario. Okay. Okay, things to prepare and plan for after the completion of the divorce. Starting fresh. What does that mean? So, a lot goes into it. So we're going to cover a couple slides now in this post-divorce stage. Divorce is very hard. I know that. Like I said, I went through a divorce, had children, fairly lengthy marriage, had various assets, that type of stuff. It's one of the hardest things that you'll ever go through if it's a non-amicable divorce. Even amicable can be difficult because it's a big change in your life. And let's all be honest, I don't know anybody that necessarily goes into a marriage planning on a divorce, unless it's a manipulated type of situation, but you don't expect that. So it's hard. So you're starting a new chapter in your life. That's why I think it's really good to focus on positive, whether it's positive reading, whatever steps you take, positive friendships, positive people to be around. You're starting fresh. You want to start fresh. You want to be positive mentally. You want, and it's hard. I know it's hard. It's difficult. You hurt. You hurt for yourself. If you have children, you hurt for them. But do your best to stay positive in it, looking forward and to a new chapter, rather than this is the end. I don't know what to do now. Sometimes you'll have that feeling for a while, but trust me, all people that are going through it hit stages of that, and there's brightness out there for you. And that's why we got this perfect picture there. There's the sunshine out there for you, even if it now seems pretty cloudy. Concentrate on your physical health too. That's important because you got to remember, a lot of times you neglect different things when you're going through a tough period, and do your best to work on just healthy eating, exercise, walking, just clearing your mind and staying healthy. And also, if you have not only minor children, but I tell you, my friend's parents went through a divorce. Well, he was about 18 at the time. He was in his senior year, and you think, okay, 18 years old, he can adjust. It was hard for him. It was they split. It was a tough situation for him, and to this day, it bothers him. So children, especially young, are important to watch out for their well-being. But I know you're hurting, but just remember, your children are hurting just as much if not more. They might be confused. So also take your children into account. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the things you can do with that on one of the upcoming slides. Emotional and life changes to anticipate after the divorce. Like I say right there, it's not easy, but you can do it. So I still keep focusing on stay positive, staying positive environments, positive friends, positive acquaintances. I know it's hard. Try not to dwell too much on it, and we all do it a little bit when we're going through a tough one because we want somebody to help us and be kind to us. But try to stay positive. Try not to dwell on the negative of it. Look for friendly supporters. One thing is there's some good, whether you're whether you belong to a certain church or just community. Well, there's a lot of groups out there that have like support groups. Those can be helpful, like divorce situation support groups or widow support groups. Those are helpful. You can have different people to bounce things off of. Some people may ahead of you in the time frame of when it took place. So that can be important for you just to get a little, like some positive feedback. And at that point, look for positive feedback. Don't try to avoid the negative folks in those situations as best you can. Sometimes it could be sisters, brothers, really good friends. Handle it tactfully, obviously, but try to focus on the positive. And like I said in the last slide, really concentrate on the best interest of your children. Okay. If you have children, how to best make sure they adjust to the divorce. This is an interesting topic here. You want honest and open communication with your kids. And obviously it depends on the age. If you have little ones, you don't want to go in there and have to be, might say, mommy and daddy are having trouble. We're going to be living apart, obviously counseling type of talk, but we love you both. And this has nothing to do with you guys. But have open and honest communication, but also take into account the age of your children you work with and their maturity levels. Counseling is a good thing for children too. Don't think, oh, I don't want to put my children in counseling. There's specialists out there. There's specialists for adults. There's also specialist children counseling. And you got to remember, in a child situation, a lot of times they shut it down. They don't want to go to mom. They don't want to upset dad. They don't go to dad. They don't want to upset mom. They don't want to hurt either party. They think it might be them that caused this. They got a lot going through their head, and sometimes they need a sounding board, and that sounding board could be a good child counselor. So do not avoid the topic, but be tactful about it based on their age. Speak kindly about your ex. So this is a hard one, and this one comes up, fairly often in a case because you're hurting. So you naturally might lash out, oh, your dad's coming to get you, he's late again. I know it's hard. Do your best to speak very kindly of your ex. You don't need to be insanely boastful if it's a bad situation, but you could say, oh, daddy's coming to pick you up in a bit, or mom. One thing I did through my divorce is I always try to say not your mom, or in situations your dad, mom, or dad. I tried not to put that your in there because I think it causes a little hurt to the kids. So that's something to think about. Remember, like I said, I've said before, children are hurting too. And remember, they are children when you're handling this. So don't use your child as a sounding board for your divorce. If you got a 8-year-old son and you're like using them as a sounding board during the divorce process or post-divorce, that's not fair to them. That's not their divorce. They are the recipient of something that they didn't necessarily ask for. Okay. Wise financial planning after the divorce. Okay, what do I do with my share of the marital assets? Now, this is, like I said, a lot of times in my situation, we will start working with somebody during the proceedings, but a lot of times say it's after or right towards the end. But what you want to do with your share of marital assets is you want to retain a financial advisor. So that's important because you want somebody to, and the next slide, we'll talk a little bit in depth about why am I getting a financial advisor? But the point is you want to retain a financial advisor to help you with your planning and going forward. You want to, now that you're divorced, you want to build a retirement plan. You may have had a retirement plan, or maybe you didn't focus on it during marriage. Well, now this is your new chapter in life. So we're building a new book for you, or a new chapter. So part of that chapter is building you a retirement plan to go forward and make sure that you are financially secure and properly taken care of for the rest of your life. Now, you might get remarried, I understand, but you still want to be prepared at that point, and you want to be wise. And that just goes without saying, but you want to use wisdom and be wise in the case. What investments are best for me at this stage in my life? So this goes back to the slide that we looked at earlier with the other bullet points of how do I decide like which assets to get. We also look at this when we're deciding your investments. We want to look at your age. Age can determine risk level in investments. We want to look at it and say, okay, you're 45 years old. You're going to be working for 20 more years. Maybe you can be a little more aggressive. Oh, I'm getting divorced and I'm 63 and I'm retiring, or I am retired. Well, then you might want to be a little more conservative in your investments. Every situation is different. We want to look at your employment status when we decide investments. If you're still gainfully employed and you're making good money, you might want to look at some, you might want to say, okay, I can put this money away in something and let it grow. And then also let my 401k grow, and I get time to let these things build, and I'll stay aggressive in there. You want to take into account your children's ages. When are they going to have needs for college? We want to look at liquidity. Do I need liquid assets? You want to look at your housing situation at that point. A lot of times both parties want the marital home because they don't want to upset it. It's nice if you can work it out. A lot of times it was two incomes supporting one household. You may very well need to purchase a new home. So we might have to take some funding to go towards the home. We want to look at the different types of investments, which are liquid assets, or you got more of your guaranteed investment assets that may not be fully liquid. Do we want to, now that we're retired, do we want some guaranteed income investment where we want to build a lifetime income? Say we're working for 10 years, we want to just put we got a chunk of our spouse's 401k, we want to put that into some principally protected investment that grows indefinitely, and I can build myself a pension. So that's sort of what we call it in the industry, to start drawing money 10 years out when I plan to retire. So we got to take it's another one of those snowflake situations where we got to look at your snowflake and figure out what are the best investments for your situation based on all your personal bullet points. What type of financial advisor should I work with after my divorce? Well, I always say this, as you're getting a divorce, your financials are very personal to you at that point. Often in a case, when a couple is married, one person is the one that has the relationship with the financial advisor. If that's a scenario, you want to retain your own financial advisor. That's personal, that's private. You don't need your husband or your wife going in and asking that financial, well, what is Jane or what is Jim investing in now? You don't want those situations. You want to retain your own financial advisor. Like I said, either start working with somebody during the divorce proceedings to get prepped, or after the divorce. There's different kind of financial advisors out there, and I don't mind cutting through it. I like to just cut through the chase and tell the truth. There's a lot of condescending financial advisors that do not work with their client in a nice relationship setting, where they're educating, they're teaching, they're explaining. They say, this is where you need to go. This is where I'm going to put you, and they cookie cut you into every other situation. You want an understanding, caring advisor that understands what you've gone through and understands how difficult it has been, that is emotionally understanding, that isn't just going to give you directions and directives and say, this is where we're going to put your money and this is how it works. And believe me, 70% of the advisors out there can be like that in these situations. So you want somebody that's understanding, that gets what you've been through, and that gets the idea of taking care of you properly. I believe you really want a specialist. You want somebody that it's part of one of their niche markets is working with divorced, widowed, single folks at that point. Just like there's specialties in medicine, and there's specialty surgeons, there's different things like that. There's specialty advisors. We're not all the same. We're not very all generic, although I have to be honest with you, 80% are generic. You want somebody, a specialty is working with single, divorced, widowed people. Education based. I always believe in education-based, but honestly, 80% of the advisors are not. And education-based means we're not just going to say, we're going to put you here, we're going to put you here, we're going to put you there, talk to you in 6 months. We want to teach people, or you want to be working with somebody that is teaching you how to properly understand why we're going here. What is the idea with this? What is this point of this, my retirement plan? You want to feel good about it. I always say, you don't want to, and I always tell this to clients when they come in, especially like at their first meeting, I never want you to jump in your car like you do when you leave the doctor's often and say, I had 10 more questions for Joe. And he scooted me out of there so quick, I never even got to answer the questions. So you want to work with somebody that you have good communication with, you have open communication with, education-based, and a specialist. Okay. Professional to seek out during and after the divorce. So what type of professional should I seek to partner with after my divorce? Well, we talked about financial advisor, and I think that's very key. Another one, we sort of talked about this earlier on, but I think counselors are good. And I'll be honest with you, I really wasn't a big counselor person necessarily, and you'll get that. I don't want to stereotype. Women are typically more open to counseling. A lot of times men seem to be more standoffish. I don't know if it's the male ego that is blocking them from wanting to see. There's nothing wrong with it. You're hurting. There's nothing wrong with talking to somebody to help you through the process. And there's people that specialize in seeing individual adults, and then also for your children. So I think that's important. It's not an absolute necessity. If you're good, you feel good about it, everything's good. I'm not saying you have to go, but don't hesitate to seek out some good professional counseling if you think it's important. I said that earlier on, but support groups. Now, those are not necessarily professionals to seek, but support groups can be very helpful in situations. I know a lot of good people that have done through, like I said, a lot of times they're often church groups, but they could be community groups. They set up nice, and you don't even necessarily need to belong to a church too, just so you know, you don't necessarily have to be religious in that matter, or wherever you are with that is your personal choice. But I know outsiders have just said, hey, you want to come with me? Say a friend got a divorce and you want to come with me? I know you're not Catholic, or you're not Lutheran, or you're not whatever you are, but I think it might be helpful. And I've heard people say they just feel good about it. It's just a nice place to share and help each other out and boost each other's spirits. And then another one that you may want to think about, this was not an absolute necessity, but the home auto health insurance type of person that you have, a lot of times you might want to end up seeking your own person, because remember, you're jumping off on your own. You might both have both used AAA, State Farm, Allstate, whoever you used for your own auto and home. Well, now you're on your own. You got to weigh out and see. If you got a nice relationship with your ex, it might be okay that we're both still going to use Susie at the State Farm office. But if it was kind of like a bit of a battle, you might want to say, I think I want to go in my own direction and just have a fresh start, somebody I can talk to that's not, how's Bob doing now? And that type of thing. I get it. Cobra. So what Cobra is, most people probably understand what Cobra is, but Cobra is something that typically you understand when you retire from an employer. You have Cobra, which is your continuing health insurance plan. Now, Cobra can also be part of a post-divorce. And going from the top of my head, like I said, I haven't actually practiced law since 2009, but I believe Cobra typically would allow an ex, say somebody's working at Ford, and you get a divorce, and the woman, or say the woman in that situation wasn't working at Ford, she can typically continue on Cobra. I believe it's for 3 years, but don't totally hold me to that. But you'll have to pay Cobra, and Cobra can be expensive. So sometimes you might go out and seek independent health insurance. But sometimes if you had some pre-existing condition, you might want to jump on that Cobra for three years. Maybe part of your divorce settlement is, my ex made the money. He's the one working at Ford. He can pay my Cobra for 3 years, and you negotiate that in a settlement. But I just want you to be aware of that. But those are why I do not want to maintain the same professionals as my ex-spouse. Okay, we talked about that. We talked about it as far as advisor, or some of the different insurances, counselors, that type of thing. You want a fresh start. You want a new start. You want a positive start. Like I keep focusing on positive because I really like to believe in positive, and I know you're hurting, so I'm trying to pump you up in a way if you're going through this right now. But you want to get that good fresh start. You want to look out for your best interest at that point. You don't want to be sharing necessarily some certain advisors, maybe even like we were talking about this earlier, but maybe you both go to the same general doctor. Now there professionals are supposed to be professionals and not discuss their professional with their clients, with even an ex. But I'm just being honest with you. Things happen. You want your best interest covered. You want your finances and investments for your eyes only. I think that's very important. And you want to keep your physical and mental health private, and that can be, say, with a medical doctor type of situation or a counselor. So it's important. You're starting fresh. Let's start fresh. Let's go in our new direction, and let's look upward. Okay. Q&A.
So we have some questions. I've held on to a couple ones because they weren't particularly appropriate for the slide we were on. So here's one that we've got. What about the stock that is not vested? Does that get divided? Unvested stock may not be available if not with that company anymore.
Okay. Well, yeah, everything is on the table to be divided. So vested stock could potentially be, and stocks in general with the company vested, or even unvested stock could be divisible during a divorce proceeding. Remember, the judgment of divorce, we're putting all the terms into the judgment of divorce. And the vesting, unvesting stock, a lot of times you'll find that in, well, different companies. A lot of times you might have startups though, and maybe that might have some big value in some of those investments. So it's all divisible. It is difficult, obviously, in some of those situations. You're divorced now it's unvested. It's been 3, 4, 5 years. How am I supposed to keep track of this? In those situations, you may want to, if you're the person that you're not the person working at the company, you may want to try to look at other assets that are cleaner that you can get your hands on quicker. Say if there's a $500,000 401k to be divided, and there's some stock that has a current value of 200,000, so we got 700,000 total, and I'm representing the person not working at the company, I'm going to go in there and say, hey, I want $350,000 from the 401k. Your client can keep the stock because it's actually their stock, and take 150 of the 401k. If it happens to blow up and then you got a Microsoft on your hands from the 80s to the 90s, that kind of stinks, but it could just as well be one that the stock doesn't do anything. So yeah, everything's divisible, everything's a marital asset, but those situations can get kind of difficult, especially down the road how do you monitor that situation?
I have another question here. When pensions are divided, does an ex's decision on when to take the payment affect the other spouse?
No, so that won't affect you. If you're drawing from a spouse's pension, that doesn't mean you have to turn yours on at that point. You've kind of spawned off, just like there's a spawning off of your own 401k, you're spawning off your baby pension out of the pension. That person whose pension it is, they can keep rebuilding theirs, building it up, but they're not going to, you're not forcing them to follow whatever the other side does. Yes. Okay.
What about debts? Are they considered marital?
Debts are marital also, and debts can be tough in a case. Now, that's one of those areas where I talked about negotiating. So what I mean by that is my spouse ran up 10 charge cards up to $120,000. It's not fair. I can argue, okay, this shouldn't be split 50-50. That's on you. That's something that can be negotiated. But ultimately, debt is divided in a case. And sometimes debt battles are more nasty than asset battles. And sometimes debt battles can scoop up a lot of a case. Sometimes we'll say, okay, it's mutual debt. You're making 250 a year. I'm taking 20. I'm making 25 a year. You pick up the debt. We'll kind of, in lieu of that, we'll switch around some assets. But yeah, debt is a big part of a divorce case, and like I said, it can lead to battles. But it's on the table.
All right, here's another question. What about remarriage? What general recommendations would you give to best protect yourself financially for remarriage after a
Okay.
divorce?
Okay, so you've in that situation, so you've been divorced, so you went through a tough situation. You're remarrying. I mean, there's prenups, there's even postnups. That postnups are, a lot of people don't realize there's postnups, postnuptials that you can actually do during the marriage. You can agree upon, I won't touch this, you don't touch that. You can look at the prenup. That's really, that's a personal position, because I know we're talking, somebody said that Bill Gates and Melinda, or Bill Gates did not have a prenup with Melinda Gates, that they're currently going through a divorce. And I'm like, they got enough, I guess they got over 100 million. They can figure out how to divide it, and they'll both be doing pretty well. But that's a touchy topic, and I'm not going to tell you what to do or not to do on a prenup, because that, and you've seen it in sometimes in movies, or you heard shows. If I'm asking somebody for a prenup, and I've been, say, hurt before, so I'm very cautious now, you got to weigh that out with how confident am I in my new marriage, and what is that telling my other side? We're about 50-50 in this one, so I want a prenup. So that's the best way you don't want to hide assets. You don't want to do that, because if that's the case, you shouldn't be getting married to this person if you're really scared. Prenups, I get it if somebody's got a ton of money and somebody doesn't. I would want the other person, if I was going to do that, I would want to talk openly about it with them, be kind about it. I'm talking about the person that you're engaged to, and say, hey, I'm worth $25 million. You have a car. Maybe we'll, what are your thoughts on a prenup? What, because you can do prenups. One thing people don't realize, prenups they can have all variations in there. You can say from a certain date forward, I maintain this, or I maintain everything going to the marriage. And even if you do a prenup, remember, typically once that marriage starts, everything going forward should be divisible. So you're really prenuping what you came into it with, but that's a touchy topic. I don't want the prenup to lead to you guys not getting married. That's a problem. So I can't say yes or no. It's something to think about, but please.
But definitely, like you were saying, talk to someone who can figure out your own particular snowflake.
Yeah, and communicate with each other about it. You don't want to do it, and then it's, like I said, and you don't end up getting married because of it, something bad like that. So I don't want to break up. Like I said, I've been divorced. We divorced people, but at the same time, I hurt every time we did a divorce, especially when there were kids involved or somebody was hurt. I'm not a proponent of it, but it happens. So the last thing you want is to be going in a fresh new marriage that now you're already on the rocks because you're not trust. So that's a tough one. That's a fine line. That's philosophical, emotional, tough one.
And I am assuming that, like, if you don't have a financial advisor, that's something that a financial advisor could help walk you through.
Yeah, so on a financial advisor, you could look at assets. We could determine division. Where should we go from there? Now, the prenups themselves, those are drafted by family law firms. So a family law attorney would actually, judgment attorney, a divorce attorney would be.
Yeah, but even just.
Yeah, but they could we could look at, okay, these are your assets. This is this. What do I don't even mind both people coming in, and saying, okay, this is what you got. Put it on the table. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not even siding with my person who's technically my client. I'm just saying, this is what's on the table. This is things you guys could think about. If you really want to do it, then I'll refer you to a divorce attorney. Being a former divorce attorney, I have a lot of divorce attorneys out there, and good, reputable, quality ones, and not sneaky, snaky ones. There are sneaky ones.
All right, and I think we have time for one final question.
Okay.
How long do you have to pay alimony? And if they get remarried, does alimony continue?
Okay. This is another snowflake question, because there's so many variations. Often you get remarried, a lot of times that will cease. That's typically a language that we'll try to put into a judgment, is especially if we're the one paying it, upon remarriage, alimony shall cease. But everything's negotiated, so everything's going into that judgment of divorce. But typically that's a typical one. Now, length of marriage plays into it. If I was married, say 10 typically, as you would think, the breadwinner, the one with more money, making more money, is typically the one that's going to paying the spousal support alimony. Remember, now in Michigan, when you see it, it's called spousal support, but I always say spousal support / alimony, but TV shows still probably say alimony more, but in Michigan, we call it spousal support, just so you know when you see that in your papers. If I'm married 30 years, I'm 30, 40-year marriage. We're both like 60 now. I was the breadwinner. I made the money. You were the at-home person, took care of the kids and all that. There's a good chance you're getting lifetime spousal support, or 10 years plus, and you're going to be, and if you're making good money, you're going to be paying out a chunk. But it's all, you were married for 10 years, you're 40 to 50 range, maybe you get 3 years. The courts will look at it and say, everything's negotiable. Mediators, courts will look at it and say, what's the other party's ability? Did they set aside their career path, drop out of school because you said you were going to take care of them and this was going to be 50 golden years, and 20 years later they started messing around on you? In that case, I'm going to go in there and say, I want as much spousal support as possible. So every case is different. It's something too, negotiable, longer marriage, bigger discrepancies in income are going to lead to longer term spousal support alimony. Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're
Well,
welcome.
folks, if you have any more questions, feel free to leave them in the chat as I end this out. And because if we haven't had a chance to get to them, we will reach out to you. I want to thank everyone for being a participant here. Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome. Thank you, Marcia.
And here is Joe's information again. On behalf of Advice Chaser, I want to thank Joe and the organizations that have worked with us to bring you this webinar today. Thank you so much for attending. Look for an email soon with a link for a replay of this event, and you're welcome to share that replay with your friends and family. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who is a great fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners has committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. Find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. Once again, from Advice Chaser, thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you at another webinar soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for attending, and good luck with your situation. I hope the best for you.
Likewise. Goodbye.